Hi, I'm Mark-Jan Harte. I'm one of the co-founders of Aidens and the CEO.
My name is Jeroen van Duffelen, also co-founder and the CEO of Aidens.
So to get started, let me give you a very short introduction about what Aidens is. We're a company based in Amsterdam in the Netherlands. We've been active for about 4.5 years. And what we do is creating software for the automated detection and segmentation of pulmonary nodules, which is very helpful because they are the early stage of lung cancer. We do this on chest CT and we use AI applications to do so. Our product is certified for the European market and currently being used in clinical practice in a number of hospitals in the Netherlands, in the UK, in France and other European countries.
So that's about the company. Right now we don't want to talk about our product or about Aidens necessarily, but we want to tell you a little bit more about how to adopt AI in clinical practice. We actually did a presentation about that at the RSNA last year as well. It was very well received, and since then we've had some new learnings again. So we updated our presentation and we aim to give you some practical advice and tips how to adopt AI into your own hospital or screening program.
Because we do have some experience.
We do have some experience after several years working in the industry with hospitals. We learned a lot about how to have the discussions internally within the hospitals, how to look at integrating it technically and evaluating it eventually for making a buying decision of AI. So based on these learnings, we've basically separated different steps, and we're going to go into depth about these steps over this presentation. And feel free to ask any questions if you're watching. We'll try to answer them real time if you have any questions. So the steps that we've defined are based on considering an AI solution. There's a lot of stuff happening in the industry right now, a lot of companies doing different things. So how do you consider those options and where do you start? Then how do you evaluate those? And how do you make a final decision? How do you do research to make that decision? And how do you get it approved within your organization so that you can actually implement and evaluate the usefulness of this solution? So starting with how to consider AI.
So considering AI, what do we mean by that? That there can be different needs that you would have as an organization that you think AI can help you with. So some organizations are interested in learning more about what AI is, about deep learning technology, training data, creating models, that type of thing. But there are also companies that want to solve a clinical question, that they have a need or a pain that they feel that an AI application would actually be able to help them with. So I think that is the first thing that you need to be clear on and agree on within your hospital or institution is what is the thing that you are trying to learn or that you are trying to solve. And the second one is that then what are the outcomes that you are looking for? When is it a success? When you've done a project, what do you think should be the result? Should you have built a model? Should you have used the software in clinical practice? Should you have successfully applied it to a certain patient population? What is it that you are really trying to do? And the third thing that you need to consider already at this stage is what kind of budget do I have? Is it am I doing something for research with a couple of PhD students, or am I going to a large vendor that with a full-blown solution? Obviously, there are different budget implications to that. So you need to be clear what that size is and where that is going to come from.
Yeah, and what we've seen so far while working with several hospitals throughout Europe is that there's two types. There's the organizations that want to experiment with AI, and they're the ones that actually have an issue or challenge to solve and they think that AI can help them. The latter group are the ones that actually will have the most benefit, and those will also be able to make a better decision on what vendor or solution to go for.
Oh. So evaluating an AI application is the thing where you are thinking about. So what does this space look like? Right, there are hundreds. If you Google imaging AI or healthcare AI, if you've been to the RSNA of the ECR in previous years, you will know that there's an entire hall filled with companies that are active in this space. So to be able to find what you're looking for. as I said, first you have to have that first step. So what is the scope of what you're trying to do? And then you have to look at the applications that are actually present for your specific application. So whether it's lung nodules, what we do, or brain hemorrhages, or whatever it is, there will be a subset of the vendors who are actually active in that space, right? That's already a big reduction of the scope. And then the second question is, so how mature is this? At what stage is this company actually? Are they do they have great research ideas, or do they actually have a product that is actually that you can test, or is it a product that's actually already certified? And at which stage do you want to engage with such a company? Another very important question is how would such a product be implemented in your workflow? Does it fit easily? Is it something that you can add with a relatively low amount of effort, or not? And is that what does it get a feel for how complicated it is to get started? Because obviously you will want to start with something that's relatively easy to
get integrated.
Exactly.
Yeah, and then looking at how it's validated, like how have the vendors validated their own solution? You look at that from a high level as well, right? So have they done any studies? Have they done any validation testing with data sets, etc.?
Yeah, and so certification is of course important if you're looking for something that is actually usable in clinical practice. And there it's also very important to ask a little more. So what exactly is the claim that has been validated? So having a say CE mark or an FDA clearance is important, but what is that claim actually for? What does it cover? And does that the claim actually cover the use case that you have?
Yeah. For example, is this just for workflow prioritization, or is it a full clinical solution that provides diagnostic decision support information? Those are completely different things with different claims and different types of certification.
Exactly.
Okay. Just to give you an example then from our end, what would you look at for ADENS?
So for something in the area that we are active in is that of course we have experience in this field. So we actually made a questionnaire for companies for hospitals, I should say, to evaluate us. And that is okay. So is the question you have, is it something that our application can help you with? Do you have a need in terms of the load of chest CT scans that you are currently handling? Do you have enough radiologists to handle them? Are you satisfied with the quality and the accuracy of what's happening at the moment? Do you maybe have a screening program that you need to handle, which is going to create a huge increase in the load? Are you able to handle that or not? And can then software work for you?
Yeah.
And for example, also for us, so does it fit with my PAC system? Have you integrated with it before? Maybe you want to send us some test scans that say, okay, hey, I would like to see how your application is actually doing on my patient population, because I have my own, my scanners, my protocols, and this is how we do things here. So can I give you some test scans to see if I'm satisfied upfront with what you're offering?
Yeah, so you just gave several examples about use cases. Can you handle the load with your radiology workflow? Are you confident and are you happy with the quality of your reporting? Those are the criteria, and then you look at the vendors. How can they actually provide you any value? So, for example, with our product, if you want to automate the reading of nodules, you look at automated detection. But if you want to actually do something with those nodules, you need to have classification, you need to have measurements, etc. Yep. So you go deeper into that part.
Yep.
Then you've defined your problem or challenge and looked at the broader scope of the vendors. Then you've narrowed it down, right? So you've looked at several vendors and you're like, okay, how am I going to now move forward? So basically, we already touched upon this. You are going to look at your own radiology workflow. How does a vendor fit into that radiology workflow, both on a technical aspect, but also on a reading on the reading part of the radiology? Do you need the detection part, or do you need the full reporting? Do you want workflow prioritization, or do you want, for example, full follow-up of scans to measure changes, for example, in nodules? So that's when you go deeper into the actual workflow that you have yourself and the needs that you have, and then you start to really pick apart the different vendors and see what features that they have.
And maybe also to add to that is one thing, of course, which is great here to do is so ask for references or check out anybody else who's using this application. Maybe you can call someone and say, hey, What do you think? Does it work for you?
Yeah, how has it been integrated in your organization? Was it easy to do that? What were the limitations, etc.?
Wow.
So with Veye Chest, we give an example here as well. It works fully in the background. It's integrated within the packs, and then you have conversations with potential customers of ours or other vendors to validate the claims that the companies are making. So that's a good suggestion, or that's definitely something you should do before adopting any of the AI solutions that are out there right now, because it's still a new market.
Absolutely.
Then we've talked about workflow integration, clinical integration. How does that work with the vendors? And the other thing is validating the accuracy of a solution. There are a lot of claims out there, but how do you validate those claims? Well, what we always advise you is to ask questions about the data sets. What has the solution been developed on? What has it been validated on? And how has it been tested? So, for example, how have we done that is we've developed a data set with 45,000 different scans. We've annotated them ourselves to provide more detailed information on the scans, and the AI has been trained on those scans. Then we've validated it with 2 different data sets. One was an internal data set, and the other one was actually through an independent clinical study. So understanding the data sets gives you a clear understanding of how accurate a solution is and how generalizable the solution is and can be used.
So that's the big thing, right? Is that the test set, is that how does that translate to your specific environment? And in your hospital with your scanners, is the test set that this, say, nice performance curve that you can see in a study or in a brochure, is that actually applicable to my situation where I may have different protocols or different comorbidities or distributions or different type of patients? So you want to make sure that the numbers you are given are actually reflect accurately your own situation. So for a good vendor, that means that your patient population should be covered already by the test set that is delivered.
And in that sense, the test set is more relevant or more important to look at.
Yes.
Because that is what the accuracy is based on.
Correct.
Okay. So the last part, what you should then look at is the certification. We just touched upon it. Initially, when you start to look at vendors, you see if they have any certification. But at one point, when you've looked at the data sets and you want to validate that you can actually use it in your clinical practice for the purpose that you intend to, confirm that the certification has been acquired for the solutions. So, for example, there are all kinds of different levels of certification, from specific decision support systems to prioritization systems. They all have their own levels of certification.
Yeah, or being a second reader or a first reader or even an autonomous reader. Yeah.
So that is the claim that you have to validate as well from the vendors looking up their certifications. An important thing there is that some vendors are actually providing their solutions already commercially, but they're only usable as research solutions and not allowed to be used in clinical practice until they've actually received their certification.
Yeah, and of course there may be say higher level certifications like the ISO 13485. That any medical device has to comply with. But for example, in the UK, there's also local regulations, and in the US, and in every country this is different. So be sure to ask good questions around that.
Yes, so you've looked at the space, you've defined your problem, then you went deeper into the vendors and selected those that you think are relevant and you want to move forward with the project. Then we advise you to make sure that somebody is responsible for pushing the project to delivering the solution in clinical practice. What we've seen so far is that this desk research that we just basically went through is relatively simple because you can do that behind a computer with 2 or 3 people assisting you, where you can have questions and discussions about. But once you actually want to implement AI, then you have to involve a lot of different stakeholders, from IT PACS managers to the procurement officers, physicians, potentially also the privacy departments, and that requires a lot of coordination between those people to get the organization to adopt your solution. So what we always advise is to get an executive sponsor, a manager of a department, or a budget holder to help you push the implementation forward. without one central person to organize this, it's going to take a lot of time before it will be implemented. We've seen now
I think maybe you can make it even stronger, right? If you do not have a central person, a champion in your organization who is going to push and pull on the project, risk of failure is quite high.
Yes.
You need to have someone in your organization who is going to make this a success.
Yeah, we've seen projects where it took 12 months before we could get something going, but we've also had projects where it happened and we got a whole implementation going within 6 months. Those were the ones where you had an actual person driving the process, and that is what you need to get this going as fast as possible.
Yeah. So from a vendor side, what we have learned is that it's also important to empower such a person, so that we provide all the information, all the documents, all the regulations, and all the security checklists, etc. That all the information that you can already provide. So otherwise, it's going to take a long time to get all that stuff organized.
Yeah, because it's not only a clinical thing that is required for integration. It requires the legal people, the data protection officers, etc. And if you have a vendor that has all that information readily available, you can get it straight to your team, but somebody needs to coordinate this whole process. And then eventually, when everybody agrees on the paperwork and IT departments lined up and everything's integrated, make sure that all your users are trained to use the solution, because without it, the AI will not have the effect that you're looking for. People need to understand how AI provides information in the clinical workflow and what to do with that information, how to set up their own hanging protocols, etc. This is very crucial for the end users to start benefiting from the AI solution.
And also the other way around, right? As a vendor, you usually can learn a lot from your users. So it's training the people who are going to use it, but it's also listening and setting up a feedback mechanism. So you can say, for your situation, it's actually different from what we have encountered so far. So can we learn from that? Can we improve it? And I think something that you're also looking for together to make a project a success, that you can learn both sides and then make it work.
Yeah, basically you're already touching upon the deployment and evaluation phase there. Deployment, last step.
Yeah, so indeed. So we have all the paperwork signed. Signatures are there. Yep. So now we need to put something that actually works. So that means that you need to have a very clear project plan. Depending on if you have an on-premise or a cloud deployment, there will be different actions that you need to take, different people that need to be involved. So all these actions need to be very defined and time managed. Now, assuming all those things are actually done, your software is working, it's accepted, it's tested, and the users have agreed, and yes, it's now working to our satisfaction, then you will have an evaluation period where people will use it in practice, give you feedback, and at some point they will need to make a decision. So, okay, so now what? What are we going to do with this? Are we happy? Do we want to keep using this or not? And if not, why not? So, and if yes, based on which criteria? So that is something that goes back to the start of the whole project, where we say, okay, you need to scope out what it is that you are trying to solve. Exactly, which problem are you trying to solve? And if you agree on that up front, then you can also execute your trial period or your initial phase to make sure that you actually get the answers to those questions. I think that's quite important. So then at the point where you're sitting down with the vendor and say, okay, so what are we going to do? You actually have thought about this, and you have information where you can make a decision that is based on data. Yeah.
And what we often see then, or often the question we get then, do I need to do a full clinical study?
Well, you can. So it depends on what your question is. If your purpose is doing research, then you can. For a lot of institutions, that is not their purpose. Exactly. They have a pain that they want to solve, and they're looking for a product to solve the pain. So. Yes. No, the point there is not to do a full clinical study. The point is to validate that the product you're getting is actually performing according to the specification. Yeah. So that goes back to checking the test set, the certifications that the companies have, doing some reference checks, and having your own important evaluation criteria.
Yeah. So that is enough. It's definitely not needed to do a full clinical study, because all the legit vendors have done a study, they have a report showing you the results, and they can already provide you the clinical background of the accuracy of the solution. So it's more a qualitative kind of validation that you're looking for when it's in clinical practice than a very quantified validation. Okay, So
I see we have a question.
we have a question.
A radiologist in the Rotterdam area. So, okay. He had a question. We talk about getting started with AI in practice, all the way up to deployment. How about the phase after deployment? So how do you provide service and how do you ensure it's sustainable? Well, it's a good question. So obviously a product, a project has an end, but if all goes well, the product keeps getting used, right? So from a customer point of view, you want to make sure that the company providing such a product is actually capable of servicing it and maintaining it. So that means also making agreements on service levels, upgrades, bug fixes, and basically the things that you would expect from, say, from any software vendor. But you need to make sure that those things are actually agreed upon and also acted upon, because many companies make a lot of promises on how good they are in helping their customers. In practice, your mileage may vary. So that is something that you have an excellent chance of during the project to find this out. How do you like working with this company? Are they on your side? Are they trying to make this a success? Do you feel that or not?
Yeah, and surprisingly, as a company ourselves, we noticed that it is very differentiating if you provide good service as an AI company, because normally in healthcare, the bigger vendors that people are used to working with, they're slower because they're so large, and smaller vendors, if you work with them, they can definitely help you speed up AI adoption or fixing bugs that you've encountered. So that's something you should look at during the implementation process as well.
We have another question from Michael, who is asking, what if all the AI solutions have the same accuracy in their results? How do you choose? Well, that's a good one. So the first question I would have is that the same accuracy in what? I think, again, that goes back to the test set, is that you need to make sure that you are comparing apples and apples.
Exactly.
And not apples and pears, as we say in Dutch. So because accuracy can vary a lot depending on which data set you are applying it to. So I think that would be the first thing, is that you want to do this on your own set of, say, a limited number of test scans to make sure that the performance that you are looking for is actually there. So, and then the second point is accuracy. Usually a application is not a single algorithm. So in case of iChest, we have 4 deep learning algorithms, and all of them have different accuracy characteristics, and they have different
They deliver
functions.
different features, yes.
Precisely. So one of them is for detection, which has a frog curve as an accuracy, and there's also one for segmentation, so to calculate the volume, which has a 3D die score as a metric. So having all of those being exactly the same across different vendors, I think is quite unlikely. But even if those are the same, I think other factors come into play. For example, you had another question on a service. We mentioned previously integration. So is this software actually usable in clinical practice? How easy is it to use? Is it easy to understand? How is it difficult or easy is it to train? Does the company pick up the phone if I have a question, if I have a problem, things like that? Pricing may be a factor. So all of these things together, basically as with any other application, you have to create a scorecard with a number of factors together that decide what is the best for you.
Yeah. Yeah, and it goes further than just accuracy, basically.
Absolutely.
Okay. Well, basically, we've gone through all the steps for implementing AI in your own environment. We quickly wanted to touch upon some of our customers that we've gone through and like how have they experienced the solution that we've developed. And when we asked them for their input, then they provided very clear needs that have been solved. For example, Liverpool Heart and Chest, which was our first site to use our solution in the UK, they had a challenge where they were getting more and more nodule requests from oncologists, but also for screening. And they were looking for a way to speed up the reading process so that they could actually deliver these reports in time and according to the requirements of the standards for lung cancer screening. So they loved the way that we presented our findings so that they could read their scans faster and then provide the input for the lung cancer screening programs, for example. And in the Netherlands, the Northwest clinics, they had a different challenge, also required faster readings, but from a different angle. Their challenge came from opening up a cardiovascular program where they got more patients coming in their same risk category for lung nodules. So they required faster reads as well, but their problem was completely different. For them, their most skeptic user said, oh, I'm not sure if AI is actually going to add any value. But once he started using it, he noticed that the reading with our input from the AI actually reduced the time. So he could read his scans faster. So we actually solved several problems there. And the way they adopted this was not to just try out AI. They actually had an issue, a challenge to fix. We looked at them at that challenge, and then we integrated the solution in their workflow to solve that challenge. These are some of our current customers. If you have questions about our solution, or if you want to know more about how to adopt AI, please reach out, send us an email, ask any questions over the live channel, and we'd be happy to answer your questions. After this session, we still have 2 more sessions to go, so we hope to see you in a couple of minutes.
Thanks for watching.